Now, to tell us more about what NASA is doing here on Earth and across the solar system, it is my honor to introduce Administrator Jim Bridenstine. Jim took the helm as our 13th administrator in April 2018, following his nomination by President Trump and Senate confirmation. Prior to joining NASA, Jim was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, serving the 1st Congressional District of Oklahoma, where he sat on the Armed Services and the Science, Space, and Technology Committees. After graduating from Rice University with a triple major, he earned his win of gold as a naval aviator, going on to fly the E-2C Hawkeye, including combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. He then moved to fly the F-18 Hornet, flying with the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center, the parent command of Top Gun. Following his active duty tours, Jim transitioned to the reserve and worked in the private sector, while earning an MBA from Cornell University. He returned to Oklahoma, where he served as the executive director of the Tulsa Air and Space Museum and Planetarium until his election to Congress. So please help me virtually welcome NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine.
Well, thank you so much, Marla, and thank you for that great, I guess, not just introduction of me, but that great synopsis of all the wonderful things that you're doing there at the Glenn Research Center, which of course is critically important to our mission and in fact our country. I want to talk about a few specific things that I think are really high priorities given what our country is up to right now and really what we're up against. And then I'll just open it up for questions. So to start, Marla, I loved what you talked about when you were talking about the gateway. The gateway is absolutely transformational for the agency, for NASA, but it's also critically important for the country and in fact for the entire world. We now have agreements that the European Space Agency and the Japanese Space Agency are going to partner with us on the gateway. There's a lot of work to do, make no mistake, there's a lot of work to do, but we now have not just the European Space Agency in Japan, but also Canada with the Canada arm that will be on the gateway. But what is the gateway and what is it all about? Think of having a reusable command and service module in orbit around the moon for 15 years. That's going to be a huge enabler for lunar surface activities. And not only was Glenn critical to getting under contract that first element of the gateway, the power and propulsion element, but also the development of that propulsive capability, solar electric propulsion, which means that the gateway is actually going to be maneuverable. We think about the Apollo program and how amazing it was, but all of those landings, 6 landings, were in the equatorial regions of the moon. The gateway is going to enable us to have sustainability at the moon and maneuverability all over the moon. We have an objective to get to the south pole of the moon by as soon as 2024. Now that's a tall order, but because of the great work done by Glenn, as a matter of fact, the gateway is well underway and we're making great progress. But we're going to have more access to more parts of the moon than ever before. We really believed when we landed on the moon back in 1969 through 1972, we really believed that the moon was bone dry because we had never been to the polar regions and we had never explored the polar regions. 10 years ago, we learned that the moon has hundreds of millions of tons of water ice on the South Pole and a lot of water ice on the North Pole as well. So what does that mean to us? That means there's life support on the surface of the moon. There's water to drink, there's air to breathe, hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen and oxygen is the same rocket fuel that powered the space shuttles. It's available in hundreds of millions of tons on the moon. And we need to go to the moon, we need to characterize it, we need to understand how to utilize it. And then ultimately we need to do that in situ resource utilization for life support and even down the road propulsion. The gateway is the enabler for all of those activities. So we're building a human landing system. This is another great story. Not only do we have a human landing system funded for the first time since 1972, but now we've got 3 separate human landing system capabilities under contract for development. at the same time. And so we're making great progress. Just yesterday, the House of Representatives passed out of the Appropriations Committee a bipartisan bill that ultimately is going to fund NASA, not at our full budget request, but there's still more time. But importantly, in there was $600 million for the human landing system that received bipartisan support. Again, it's short of what we had requested, but it's still significant that there is strong bipartisan support for the Artemis program. So we're moving rapidly to get the next man and first woman to the South Pole of the moon, and we want to see that happen by 2024. So we think about what that means with a human landing system and the gateway in orbit around the moon. That means we're going to have more access to more parts of the moon, do more things than we've ever been able to do before. So all of this is very positive, and we're making research for all of the amazing work that has already been done. So these are all very important capabilities that we're going to continue to develop and look forward to working with Glenn on. The other thing that I think is important to note is really how our country right now is really under great stress with aeronautics. We think about commercial airliners. I just read yesterday that in the last quarter, Delta Airlines lost $5 billion with a B in the last quarter. And that is not unlike all of the other airlines across the industry. And of course, that's having a huge impact on the industrial base of this country and those kind of things. But here's the thing. We know that people are going to start flying again. We know that we need public-private partnerships to do the generational leaps in technology. And we know that the Glenn Research Center is a critical capability for those generational leaps. Marla, I heard you talk about how we're going to transform engines for higher bypass ratios, for more fuel efficiency, for fewer carbon emissions, and in fact, to reduce noise. All of those are critically important. So some of the things that we need to do as a nation is we need to understand how to make the core of the engine smaller. And by doing that, the bypass ratio increases. So the fans have been getting bigger. The turbo fans on the engine, those fans are getting bigger, which is very positive. We're getting more efficiency, fewer carbon emissions, but less noise. All that's fantastic. But there's a limitation because the fans are now so big that they're going to start hitting the ground given the height of the wings. So what does that mean? That means we need to make the core smaller. If we can make the core smaller, we can once again get an evolutionary jump in efficiency. But it's not just the creating higher bypass ratios. It's also integrating electric propulsion into the architecture. So hybrid electric has to be a huge part of what we do in the future. And of course, up there in Ohio, we've got the NEAT, the NASA Electric Aircraft Test Bed, which is an amazing capability that's going to enable us to make these transformations into electric aircraft, or I should say hybrid electric aircraft for the commercial transport industry. Again, this is a very competitive market. Really right now, there are two players in that market. It's really Boeing and Airbus. Of course, China is coming online quickly, but of course, they're interested in taking a lot of market share. All that being said, we need to be moving ahead faster than ever before, and a lot of the research that's happening there at the Glenn Research Center is going to enable that to happen. Finally, I think it's important that we not only look at the efficiency of engines and how we would do that with higher bypass ratios and more electric architectures, but we also need to look at concepts that transform how we do, aerodynamics, for example. So a truss brace wing where we can get a higher aspect ratio on our wing surfaces. That's critically important. If we can spread the wing out, make it longer and thinner, it reduces what we call induced drag. And I know I'm talking to the audience at Glenn, so you know what that means. Yes, there will be more parasitic drag, but it reduces the bigger component, which is induced drag, so we can actually get more fuel efficiency than ever before with a longer, thinner, higher aspect ratio wing. But in order to achieve that, of course, we're going to need a truss-braced wing to fly at those transonic speeds or speeds that are just short of supersonic. So these are all important capabilities. The Glenn Research Center has been really at the forefront of all of these things. And we're looking to a really bright future, not just on the surface of the moon, but also here on Earth as it relates to aeronautics. A lot of people forget about that first A in NASA, which is in fact aeronautics. So with that, Jim, I'll just open it up to questions if you want to lead a few questions.
Sure. Thank you very much, Jim. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Good. Perfect. So great to hear you touch on the aero side, because we definitely know that, that's incredibly important to Glenn. And as a side note, I've been trying to get rid of both parasitic and induced drag for years, but it's just not working out very well. We have a lot of space people in our audience, though. So why don't I give you the first question here from Marcia Smith from Space Policy Online. What is the minimum level of funding that NASA needs from Congress in fiscal year 2021 for HLS to be ready in 2024? Basically, how would you rate the odds of actually getting that funding?
I think the odds are good. When we go through this process, the way the government gets funded, in the House of Representatives, they're going to pass a bill that ultimately is going to fund the priorities of the House of Representatives. And then the Senate, in normal times, the Senate would pass a bill that would fund the priorities of the Senate. And then those two bills would be conferenced together, and there would be an agreement made. That final bill would go to both chambers for final passage, and then to the president's desk for signature. In this particular case, we're living in a very challenging time, and there is a lot of partisanship. My number one highest priority as the NASA administrator has been to keep NASA apolitical, bipartisan, and not let the divisions take hold that have cast us as an agency to and fro in the past. So to that extent, I would say, number one, we are very grateful to the House of Representatives for the bipartisan support that they determined was appropriate for the human landing system. Like I said, it's not everything that we asked for. We asked for about $3.3 billion, and in their bill we have $1 billion. We need to make the moon landing in 2024. We need the $3.3 billion for the human landing system. But I do believe that when that bill is conferenced with the Senate, which of course has a higher level for the Commerce Justice State Appropriation Bill, they'll have a higher level. I think we will have the ability to get the resources that we need to land on the moon in 2024. So we're grateful for the bipartisan support in the House. We're looking for bipartisan support in the Senate. And I think when those two bills are conferenced, it will be the 3.3 billion that we've actually asked for. I also think, in this time, what you're going to see here at the end of this fiscal year, which is the end of October, or the end of September, what you're going to see is a continuing resolution. I think that's the direction we're going. It's pretty much the pattern of behavior that we've seen now year in and year out, year after year. So we'll see a continuing resolution at the end of the fiscal year, and that will take us past the election and up until probably Christmas. I think around Christmas, we'll see an omnibus spending package of which NASA will be a part. When you think of an omnibus, the way the process goes, the House and the Senate, they should each pass 12 appropriation bills in regular order with open amendments. That doesn't happen very often these days. But to the extent that they do, if we end up in a CR, what will happen is right before Christmas, I think we'll have a massive appropriation bill called an omnibus, where they roll all 12 appropriation bills into one bill, and they'll pass it right before Christmas. We've seen that over and over and over again. And what we want to see happen is when we get funded for 2021, we want to see that $3.3 billion in there. And if we get that, then we'll be on track to land on the moon in 2024.
Great, thanks. Okay, so another kind of popular question on here is about the technologies needed for sustainable human presence. So let's see. As NASA moves forward beyond the 2024 moon landing and the gateway to systems that will be needed for sustainable human lunar presence, and the same thing for Mars, what leadership roles do you see NASA Glenn playing to help achieve this?
Great question. I'll tell you, one of the most important things for sustainable presence on the surface of the moon is, of course, surface power. And of course, Glenn has been advancing what we call kilopower, which is an ability to use nuclear power on the surface of the moon. And that is a technology and a capability that will enable us to do not just sustain human life on the surface of the moon, but to do research and exploration, to use the resources of the moon, extract the water ice, separate the water ice from the regolith, maybe even crack the water ice into hydrogen and oxygen so that we can use it on the surface of the moon. But I think when it comes to surface power, the Glenn Research Center is the preeminent center for that activity. And so we look forward to seeing that not only come to fruition, because it already has. Kilopower has been an amazing project, but we need to see it delivered to the surface of the moon. And we need to see it scalable. We need to see even more power on the surface of the moon. And then, beyond that, we need habitation, and we need to be mobile on the surface of the moon. So those are other elements that where we're going to need power. When we talk about the unique places on the moon that we want to go, the South Pole, because of the water ice, is a critically important place to go. And there's, in some spots on the South Pole of the moon, there's almost permanent sunlight, which means we can take advantage of a lot of solar power. And the Glenn Research Center has been absolutely fantastic in enabling solar panels to ultimately withstand the radiation of deep space. So those technologies are critically important as well. So look, there's a bright future on the surface of the moon, but also when we talk about going to the surface of the moon, we want to have not just presence in one spot on the moon, we want to have presence in a number of places on the surface of the moon, which is why the gateway is so important. And they're not all going to have humans necessarily, but we can have different robots in different parts of the moon. So these are all, I think, important capabilities that the Glenn Research Center is going to be leading the way on.
Great, thanks. I think we've got time for maybe one or two more, if that's good with you.
You bet.
I know we got started a little late. Actually, this one comes from Carol Lane, our president. So you did mention working with Europe on Gateway and with China moving forward pretty aggressively on their lunar program. How do you see international cooperation and competition evolving with respect to both Gateway and surface lunar activities?
Yeah, so when it comes to what we're using right now is we're using the IGA, the Intergovernmental Agreement, which we have on the International Space Station. So the Intergovernmental Agreement, of course, has a number of nations involved. There's 11 nations that are part of the European Space Agency that are involved in human spaceflight. There's 22 total, but 11 that are involved in human spaceflight. Then we've got Canada, we've got Japan, we've got the United States, all operating the International Space Station. So there's a total of 15 countries right there. And then Russia, of course. So we're using that intergovernmental agreement to establish kind of the roles and responsibilities on the Gateway, which has been tremendously valuable because it's gone a lot faster than it otherwise would have gone. When we go to the surface of the moon, it's hard to extrapolate the intergovernmental agreement, which was developed for the International Space Station. We can take that to the Gateway, but going to the surface of the moon, we're going to need to do things differently. So we have established what are called the Artemis Accords. The Artemis Accords are basically bilateral agreements between the United States and other countries for how we're going to collaborate on the surface of the moon. but it also establishes a baseline set of principles for what are the rules by which we're all going to operate on the surface of the moon, and not just on the surface of the moon, but also in space in general. Think basic things like following the registration convention of the Outer Space Treaty, or the liability convention of the Outer Space Treaty, the due regard convention of the Outer Space Treaty. We can all work on the surface of the moon as long as we're not interfering with each other, which is the premise of due regard. So right now, we've taken the partners of the International Space Station and we're collaborating with them on the gateway. Then we're going to use the Artemis Accords to collaborate on the surface of the moon. And the glory there is that we can go well beyond the 15 nations that currently operate on the International Space Station. There are a lot of countries that are stepping up, creating new space agencies, putting money into those agencies, and then dedicating that money to the Artemis effort. So when we think about countries like Australia, for example, last year or a year before, they created a brand new space agency. They had never had one before. They put $150 million into their space agency, and they dedicated the entire amount to contributing to the Artemis program. Tremendously valuable for the partnership. United Arab Emirates, I mean, in just a few days, they're going to be launching an orbiter to Mars. This is a country that has had a space agency for, I think, 5 years now, and they're already launching to Mars. By the way, the United Arab Emirates is launching to Mars from Japan, again, demonstrating that space is very uniting. It doesn't just unite us Republicans and Democrats, which I think is fantastic. It transcends the geopolitics of the era. And so all of this is very positive. But we think about the United Arab Emirates, Luxembourg. You know, I think there's a great hope for Israel and you know, they're interested in going to the moon and doing other space exploration. There's a great hope for India, which of course is interested in going to the moon and doing other exploration. We have, right now as an agency, we have agreements. We have over 700 active agreements, international partnerships on different missions, from the Science Mission Directorate to the Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorate. So there is a bright future for exploration being done, you know, with our international partners, not just in space, but on the surface of the moon and eventually on Mars.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you, Jim. I think we're running a little long because of the technical difficulties. So I think I'm going to stop there.
Okay.
And thank you very, very much for your time today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Can I make one last pitch, Jim, before I depart?
Please do.
Finally, for all the audience that's out there listening, and I know the audience is broad and diverse and includes all ages, I want people to know I'm the first NASA administrator in history that was not alive when we had humans living and working on another world. I was not alive in 1969 when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were walking on the moon, nor was I alive in 1972, the last mission to the surface of the moon, with Gene Cernan lifting the last boot off the moon. We have to make sure that this generation doesn't go by without people living and working on another world. We have to make sure that this generation, we love the Apollo generation. We need to declare that ourselves, we are the Artemis generation. We are the generation that is going to demand that we have a permanent presence off the Earth and, in fact, on other planetary bodies. You know, there's a reason we call the program Artemis. As much as we love Apollo, during the Apollo era, all of our astronauts were fighter pilots and test pilots, and there were no opportunities for women in those days. Well, today we have this very diverse, highly qualified astronaut corps that includes women. And so we named the program after Apollo's twin sister. Her name, of course, is Artemis, and she, in Greek mythology, was the goddess of the moon. So we're going to the moon. It's going to unite people. It unites political parties. It unites us across borders. It's a human effort that absolutely is, it's transformational in its ability to inspire. And we need to make sure that this generation This generation is the Artemis generation, and we do not let another generation go by where we don't have people living and working on another world. So with that, Jim, I just want to say thank you. And Marla, I appreciate you. And to all those at the Glenn Symposium, have a great, great symposium.